Breaking news tonight, Canada bans some passenger flights to keep COVID-19 from spreading. What countries are affected and what difference will it make to the rise of the variants? Plus, the Halifax region is now just hours away from entering a near total lockdown. Ontario's premier apologizes.
I know we made a mistake.
His new pledge for paid sick leave as his political popularity plummets. Ambitious new targets from Canada and the U.S. to cut carbon emissions.
And we will continually strengthen our plan.
The new goals and the skepticism. And when trash becomes treasure.
My hope is that I make $5,000 to $10,000 in a month.
Fashioning a booming business from selling secondhand clothes.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with breaking news. New travel restrictions just announced by the federal government. Direct flights into Canada from India and Pakistan will be banned for 30 days starting tonight. India has had an explosion of COVID-19 cases. It hit a global record today, more than 314,000 new infections in just one day. The surge is being fueled by a new variant first detected in India.
Given the epidemiological situation in India, it makes sense to pause travel from that region while our scientists and researchers have an ability to better understand this variant of interest, to better understand where the trajectory of the cases in that region is going.
Abigail Bimman is following this. Abigail, why is the federal government doing this now?
Well, Donna, there has been mounting pressure on the government to do this. That variant, dubbed a double mutant, has already been found here in Canada. The ban involves passenger flights and commercial flights from India and Pakistan for the next 30 days, although cargo flights carrying vaccines, among other things, will not be impacted. The federal opposition had been calling for specifically this, while the premiers of Ontario and Quebec wrote a joint letter calling on the Prime Minister to cut international flights and to step up restrictions at land crossings.
I'm expected on the U.S. side. I just drop off all my commercial goods that I'm dropping off, then I'm expected to come straight home. I can't even get gas there.
Todd Rigglesworth crosses the Ontario-New York state border daily and is exempt from quarantine. He says this small crossing is getting busier.
I usually see the same cars over and over again, but I'm seeing a lot I don't recognize, so I think it's either people coming back from Florida.
The Canada Border Services Agency doesn't track why people cross, but it's no secret people have been trying to avoid the mandatory hotel quarantine by using a land border instead. For those arriving by air, the Public Health Agency of Canada says at least 144 people in BC and 211 in Ontario face a $3,000 fine for refusing to go to a government-approved quarantine hotel. Since March 2020, there have been at least 801 total tickets issued for not complying with the Quarantine Act. Since hotel stays became mandatory, the Public Health Agency of Canada said it got nearly 275,000 day one test results back from both air and land travelers, and 3,732 people tested positive. That's 1.4%, or more than 1 in every 100 people. Thursday's decision to ban flights from India and Pakistan was based on a breakdown of those positive cases.
While India accounts for 20% of recent air travel volumes to Canada, over 50% of all positive tests conducted at the border are from this country. And a similarly high level of cases compared to travel rates have also been linked to Pakistan.
Is it too late? I don't think it's ever too late. But on the other hand, too, once they get a foothold and they're being transmitted, they certainly can get amplified.
And there are still some unanswered questions. The Public Health Agency of Canada wouldn't tell us how many of those people who tested positive were isolating, nor how many people refused to take a test at all. Donna?
All right, Abigail Bimman in Ottawa, thank you. Now to Ontario. Premier Doug Ford, who had been front and centre throughout the pandemic, held his first news conference in nearly a week today. He's self-isolating because one of his staff has tested positive for COVID-19, so he appeared via video link from his late mother's home. He said it is not lost on him that he is still getting paid while isolating. And he apologized for closing playgrounds and trying to give police arbitrary powers, policies he swiftly reversed after a public backlash.
I know we got it wrong. I know we made a mistake. And for that, I'm sorry and I sincerely apologize.
Ford is now promising a provincial sick pay program, but there's no detail on what it will be or when it will happen. Meanwhile, hospitals in Ontario are still overloaded. There are 2,350 Ontarians in hospital with COVID-19 now. 806 of them are in ICU. 588 are on ventilators. Global's Queen's Park Bureau Chief Travis Dhanraj is with me from Toronto. Travis, Premier Ford has been criticized for hesitating to act and then going too far and for not listening to his own science advisors. What are you hearing about his strategy and what's going on behind the scenes?
Well, I'm hearing that there's a lot of chaos behind the scenes, to be quite frank, Donna. We saw over the weekend that, as you mentioned, they reversed decisions pretty quickly, within 24 hours, on playgrounds and some policing powers. And I've heard that at the cabinet table, there was a lot of pushback to those decisions. And the Premier's office ultimately came down, and some of his advisors, including his chief of staff, from what I'm hearing, decided that they were going to go with this decision on playgrounds. It is not something that any expert that I know of has asked for, and that is one of the real criticisms here, that the Premier continues and his government continues to disregard some of the expert advice that they are hearing, and there's a question as to whether or not and how much politics are playing a part in some of these decisions.
So, Travis, what now for Premier Ford? Does the fact he's committing to paid sick days for essential workers perhaps tell you he might be prepared to listen more?
I think today's news conference does signal a shift, and I think you saw that with the tone that the Premier had coming out. It is not often that we hear from this Premier a flat-out apology, an admission that he was wrong, that the decision that his government made was wrong. Usually he digs in his heels and he sticks to his guns, so to speak. We do know that there will be some sort of paid sick day program. What that looks like right now is still unclear, but the experts have been calling for that for some time. They've also been calling for essential workers to be vaccinated. So on those two fronts, I think that you will definitely see a shift, and the Premier knows that this is a political calculation for him as well, because his approval ratings right now are going down. In recent polls, they've sunk about 20 points or so. So I think we will start to see some changes when it comes to the government strategy.
Okay, Travis Dhanraj in Toronto, thanks. Tough new restrictions are coming to parts of Nova Scotia after a rise in new COVID cases reported today. There are 38 new infections detected in Nova Scotia. That's the biggest single-day jump in nearly a year. Community spread is happening in the Halifax area, so starting tomorrow, the region will go into a 4-week near-total lockdown.
These restrictions are meant to be a circuit breaker. They are designed to curb social activity so that we can protect our healthcare system from surges and keep our vaccine rollout on track.
As part of the new restrictions, restaurants in the Halifax area will be takeout only. In-person sports and social events are banned, and people are being told to avoid all non-essential travel. Turning now to a rare meeting of minds at a difficult time for the world and bold new pledges for action on climate change. U.S. President Joe Biden hosted a virtual summit of dozens of world leaders today, including China, India, Russia, the UK, Germany, and Canada, and he committed to cutting U.S. greenhouse gas emissions by as much as 52% by the end of this decade.
This is the decisive decade. This is the decade we must make decisions that will avoid the worst consequences of the climate crisis. This is a moral imperative, an economic imperative, a moment of peril, but also a moment of extraordinary possibilities.
It is a pledge that will require fast and far-reaching changes, from how people power their homes to the cars they drive and the jobs they do. Canada, which has yet to meet previous climate targets, pledged today even more ambitious ones. Our chief political correspondent David Akin looks at the promises and the reaction.
U.S. President Joe Biden made the call to climate action, and Canada's Prime Minister responded.
Our new climate target for 2030 is to reduce our 2005 emission levels by 40 to 45%.
The previous target was to cut emissions by 30%, and to do that by the end of this decade.
Canada is now on track to blow past our old target of 30% reduction below 2005 levels.
But some critics say Canadian governments have a history of setting targets but never hitting them. Others say the targets are not ambitious enough. In any event, many experts say hitting the new targets is possible.
I mean, I think it's going to be tough. It is ambitious.
But it will require a radical overhaul of Western Canada's energy sector.
It's going to be a transition. Everybody recognizes that. And we need to get to the point where we're not combusting carbon. That's what net zero means. You've got to get to a point where you're not combusting carbon as a source of energy.
But Wilkinson conceded that his government has yet to come up with the detailed plan to meet the new targets Trudeau announced at the summit.
We will need to continue to do work over the coming 9 years, which remain between now and 2030. There certainly are areas where we believe that we can continue to accelerate progress.
Some potential ideas: a massive home retrofit program to plug energy leaks, a complete change to Canada's transportation supply chain, and the creation of new kinds of energy industries.
The two natural resource wild cards would be hydrogen and biofuels, second generation biofuels. Is there potential for exports from Canada?
But all agree, whatever plan the government tables to meet its new ambition to quickly cut emissions, it will cost billions. David Akin, Global News, Ottawa.
Canada's greenhouse gas emissions represent only about 1.6% of the global picture, and President Biden, who said America represents about 15% of the world's emissions, made the case that no nation can solve this crisis on their own. The other big emitters, China and India, both heavily dependent on coal, did not commit to new targets today. But as Jackson Prosco reports, their hands may be forced by the economic realities of climate change and an emerging demand for green products.
Outside the White House, activists dropped a pile of manure to signal their dissatisfaction with the new U.S. emissions targets. Not ambitious enough, they say.
The United States isn't waiting. We are resolving to take action.
Inside, President Joe Biden found a virtual audience thrilled by America's return.
There can be no doubt about the world needing your contribution if we really want to fulfill our ambitious goal.
4 years ago, there was global dismay after President Donald Trump withdrew from the Paris Accord.
Entering into an agreement that disadvantages the United States.
Today, experts believe Biden's climate goals are well insulated from future shifts in the political winds.
Our companies, our citizens, our states, our cities are moving forward, making the opponents increasingly kind of the anomaly.
In part because money talks. U.S. climate goals are now wrapped up in the global race to own the green economy.
There are opportunities here, economic opportunities here, for whoever takes climate change and its solutions the most seriously.
That sets up potential cooperation and competition between the U.S. and China, the world's manufacturing powerhouse and largest greenhouse gas emitter. China has so far shied away from near-term emissions targets, but says it aims to be carbon neutral by 2060, 10 years after Biden's goal for the U.S.
What tethers us together with Chinese energy transition and emissions reductions is the fact that they're basically servicing our appetite for emissions.
Biden's bet seems to be there will be no alternative but for China and the rest of the world to act far sooner, because the costs of not would simply be too high. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Coming up, how Canada's goal to be greener will affect people who work in oil and gas. Scientists have long been warning the world is running out of time to stave off the catastrophic impact of climate change. The federal government has made the most ambitious pledge yet to curb greenhouse gas emissions, but it won't be easy. In 2019, Canada's top emitters were Alberta, Ontario, Quebec, Saskatchewan, and BC, with Alberta leading the way by far. Together, they released 91% of Canada's total greenhouse gas emissions. The oil and gas sector was the largest source, accounting for 26% of the total, an increase of 87% from 1990 to 2019. The hike is mostly attributable to the increased production of crude oil and the expansion of the oil sands industry. That is largely why Canada is the only G7 country whose greenhouse gas emissions have increased since the Paris Agreement. The oil and gas industry is a big emitter, but also a huge economic driver in Canada. And as Eric Sorensen reports, that makes shifting to a green economy a big challenge.
In the capital of Canada's biggest oil-producing province, one more home is going solar. a symbol of an alternative energy future. Alex Miyalovich used to work in oil and gas, but saw an opportunity 7 months ago to pivot to installing solar panels.
It's been pretty non-stop busy lately. We've got 2 or 3 jobs going a week with my crew. So it's been actually really good.
The company he works for, Kubi Renewable Energy, is already changing the face of Edmonton. It installed solar cells on almost 700 windows to power a portion of the city's convention center.
It's super satisfying turning on a system and seeing all that power being generated just by the sun.
But the transition will be disruptive for an industry as massive as Alberta's oil and gas sector. In Fort McMurray, there is no imminent green economy to rescue a community that depends enormously on the nearby oil sands and has seen jobs lost to a pandemic on top of the oil slump.
It's just taken an immense toll on the psyche of the city in terms of the optimism that we used to feel.
In Canada, a shift away from oil and gas will not be felt evenly. Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador account for most oil sector jobs. Specifically, oil and gas extraction represents 1.5% of the national labor force. But in communities like Fort McMurray and Cold Lake, it's 25 to 30%.
Having gainful employment is immensely huge for them. They need this work.
Ottawa sees the job crunch coming, proposing $250 million over 3 years to upskill and redeploy workers in growing industries, and $55 million to support, in part, a just transition for workers in sectors like energy.
We're now starting to see more of a proactive role by the federal government to make direct investments in the clean energy transition, that we ought to focus those in the communities that are going to bear that brunt of the impact.
The uncertainty in the oil patch is real, but so are the small examples where workers are being retrained.
A lot of the skills that I've developed over the years in oil and gas, I can bring them over to renewables and still use that kind of stuff.
Alex Miyalovich says there's room for more workers to retrain as he has for a job that looks like it'll be around for a while. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Another funeral for a black man killed by the police. Still ahead, remembering Daunte Wright. Family and friends gathered in Minneapolis today to honor the life of Daunte Wright. The 20-year-old unarmed black man was shot and killed by a white police officer during a traffic stop. Wright's mother spoke to her son just moments before that deadly encounter. Today, she and his father were overcome with emotion.
When he walked in the room, he lit up the room. He was a brother, a jokester. He was loved by so many. He's going to be so missed.
Take your time, Katie.
Words can't even explain how I feel right now. You know, that was my son.
Wright was remembered as an adoring father to his 1-year-old son, who bears his name. Hundreds came to the Minneapolis church for the funeral, including families of other black men killed in police custody. And at one point, members of George Floyd's family were called to the front, showing solidarity with the grieving family. Cashing in on hand-me-downs next, the sustainable shopping boom. NASA's Perseverance rover just made oxygen on Mars. It's a giant leap that may one day turn science fiction into fact, allowing humans to survive on the red planet. Perseverance used an instrument called MOXIE to convert carbon dioxide into breathable air. After an hour, MOXIE produced about 5.4 grams of oxygen. That's enough to keep an astronaut alive and healthy for about 10 minutes of normal activity. Well, since the pandemic began, much of the fashion industry has taken a hit, but not the resale sector. The online market for used clothes is growing faster than the market for new ones. As Robin Gill reports, a younger generation is reassessing both its social values and the bottom line.
Laurel Grad has a side hustle.
I'm a professional shopper in a way.
A nurse by day and a thrift seeker at night.
I think it's slowly turning into a career I didn't know I would have.
The 31-year-old spends her free time perusing thrift stores, looking for deals on trendy clothes, and then reselling them online. She's made some serious cash on sites like Facebook Marketplace and apps like Poshmark.
In our first year of operations here in Canada, we had 1.4 million active users. So that definitely shows the hunger and the appetite for the resale market.
Poshmark launched in 2019, but there are similar apps that are pushing the used economy.
Within the next 10 years, what we're going to see is the global market for these secondhand purchases is going to go up to, they're saying $80 billion worldwide.
Consumer trends show a younger generation wants to be more socially conscious while saving.
Consumers want to be more ecologically conscious. Obviously, if you buy secondhand, you're using resources that exist rather than purchasing new stuff.
You're choosing to, wanting to extend the item, the life of the item.
Thrift stores have been around for generations. They rely on Canadians to clean out their closets and donate the items. Many thrift stores help fund outreach programs for low-income families. So are the thrift seekers robbing them of their bottom line? That was a dilemma facing Laurel Grad until she did some research.
They need us to buy it. So 99% of their income comes from buyers. And so they want people to come in, buy the clothes, and then that can go back into the community.
Her conscience clear, she's now thinking about giving up nursing. Her business on the side is growing.
My hope is that I make $5,000 to $10,000 in a month from selling secondhand clothing.
What started out as a hobby to make a little extra cash just may be a full-time job after all. Robin Gill, Global News, Vancouver.
And that is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Here in Canada is the hamlet of Delow, southwest of Brandon, Manitoba. Thanks for watching. Robin Gill will be at the anchor desk tomorrow, and I will see you again on Saturday for the new reality. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.